The day begins early, before heat thickens the air. A Shang workshop is not a single room with one craftsman, it is a place of roles and routines, some people carrying water, some tending fires, some sorting stone, some shaping, some polishing. Archaeological descriptions of the late Shang capital speak of specialized workshop areas, including jade production, organized under control. You arrive with cloth wrapped around your tools. You do not arrive empty-handed. In a place where small objects are valuable, the habit of guarding what is yours becomes quiet and automatic. Inside, the air smells of damp earth, wet stone, and the faint metallic tang of work tools. The floor is not clean like a palace floor. It is a working floor, grit in corners, water stains, and the patient scuff marks of feet returning to the same places every day. Polishing jade is not like wiping a bowl until it shines. Jade is hard and tough. You do not cut it easily. You abrade it. You wear it down. You persuade its surface to become smooth. Museum sources describe jade being worked through tools plus moist abrasive slurry, and the same principle applies whether the tool is a blade, a drill, or a string. The abrasive does the work. So your day is built around three things: water, abrasive grit, and time. Time is the invisible ingredient the overseer cannot manufacture. He can pressure you. He can count output. But he cannot speed up stone without increasing breakage. And breakage costs more than slowness. You mix the slurry carefully. Not too thick, or it clumps. Not too thin, or it runs away and stops biting. A container holds water. Another holds abrasive. Ordinary sand can work, especially if it contains hard particles like quartz. Research describing Chinese jade work emphasizes abrasive sands/powders as essential. You stir it with a stick. It looks unimpressive, muddy water. But it is stronger than the jade, in the way a river is stronger than a mountain, not through force, but through persistence. The sound begins when you touch tool to stone. A soft hiss. A faint rasp. A steady whisper that becomes your work clock. Not all jade is the same. Some pieces carry pale milk tones. Some carry darker shades. Some have veins, clouding, irregularity. In later Chinese history, artisans intentionally use natural color variation. Scholarship notes techniques of using color variation as craft. In your period, the object's purpose matters. Is it meant to be worn? Offered? Placed with the dead? Stored as a marker of rank? Anyang/Yin ruins are known for elite artifacts including jades. Museums emphasize jade ornaments and ritual goods in Shang contexts. You don't choose what the object means. You choose how smooth it becomes. Your task is to make it worthy of its destination. The work is repetitive, but not mindless. You polish in small circles. You pause to rinse. You check the surface. You add more slurry. Then circles again. If you keep polishing without rinsing, the slurry loads with powder and stops cutting well. If you rinse too often, you waste abrasive and time. So your hands learn a rhythm that your thoughts can follow like a lullaby. Circle. 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 Rinse. Wipe. Circle. The sound changes when it's working properly. A dry scratch means too little water. A silent slide means too little abrasive. A steady whisper means the mixture is right. Other workers cut. Some use blades with abrasive. Some use string tools pulled back and forth. Some drill solid or tube drills with abrasive slurry constantly added. The National Palace Museum describes exactly this principle: blade slicing, cutting wheel, solid/tube drilling, string tool always supported by abrasive slurry. You are not the cutter today. You are the finisher. And finishing is where mistakes become visible. A cutter can remove material quickly. A polisher reveals whether the cutter was careful or sloppy. Your hands expose everything. That's why you are respected in the workshop, not glamorous, but essential. An overseer may not understand polishing in his bones, but he understands counts. He understands schedules. He understands delivery. Large production zones at the Shang capital imply controlled workshop organization and oversight. He visits. He watches quietly. Sometimes he says nothing. Silence can be heavier than criticism. You keep your pace steady anyway. Because rushing is how you create heat. Heat is how you crack stone. Cracked stone becomes waste. Waste becomes blame. So you keep the rhythm you trust. A polished jade surface is valuable. And where value sits on a bench, hands begin to reach. Not dramatic criminals, small opportunists. A piece swapped. A tool borrowed and forgotten. A bag of finer abrasive disappearing. So the workshop develops habits. Objects stay inside. Tools are wrapped and counted. Water containers are washed. Finished pieces are moved quickly to controlled storage. Because jades are tied to elite culture and tomb practice, objects that pass through workshops are not casual goods. You don't accuse. You protect your work through routine. Routine is safer than suspicion. At home, your wife reads your hands like a story. The skin is softened from wet work. The fingertips are slightly tender from constant pressure. Your nails carry traces of pale powder. You wash, but stone stays. Children watch you wash. They learn without instruction that some work follows you home. Food is simple. Grain, vegetables, perhaps fish if it's available. The meal is not a feast, it is fuel. Your wife keeps household stability so your hands can keep workshop stability. This is the hidden system under craft. Someone must keep life steady for skilled labor to continue. The deepest fear is not an enemy with a weapon. It is one careless moment. A slip that scratches the surface. A grain of grit caught under the wrong pass. A tiny chip at the edge that you cannot hide under polishing. Polishing reveals. Polishing judges. So you work slowly. And the slow work becomes calming because it turns anxiety into method. Rinse. Wipe. Circle. The surface grows smoother. The object grows quieter. And your mind begins to match it. The jade you polish did not begin at your bench. It began in mountains you will never see. In rivers that flow westward, far beyond the capital's reach. The stone travels toward you for weeks carried by men whose names you do not know, whose faces you will never meet, whose labor becomes invisible the moment the jade arrives wrapped and ready. But the journey is real. And understanding it changes how you touch the stone. Jade does not grow in neat seams like metal ore. It appears as boulders, as river stones, smoothed by water, hidden among ordinary rock. The best collectors work in winter when rivers run low and slow. They wade into cold water at dawn. They lift stones. They test weight. A jade boulder is heavier than it looks, denser than common river rock. So the first test is simple. Lift. Feel the weight. Set it down or carry it to shore. The second test is sound. A collector strikes the stone with another rock, not hard, just a tap. Jade rings. Not like metal. Not like pottery. A soft, sustained tone. A hum that lingers. Ordinary stone sounds dull, dead. Jade sounds alive. So collectors move along the riverbed listening. Tap. Listen. Discard. Tap. Listen. Keep. The rhythm becomes hypnotic, like you're polishing circles, but colder, wetter, slower. From the western rivers to Anyang is more than 100 days of walking. Not continuous. Not direct. The jade moves in stages. Collectors carry boulders to a staging point near the river. There, overseers inspect. They tap each stone again. They look for cracks, thin lines that mean the boulder will split badly when worked. They look for color. Pale milk tones are prized, but darker shades are useful too. They mark acceptable stones with charcoal. A simple circle. No words. Just a mark that says, "This travels." Then the jade waits. Waits for enough boulders to justify sending a caravan. Waits for weather to cooperate. Waits for the route to be safe. And while it waits, collectors return to the river. When enough jade has accumulated, a caravan forms. Not a grand procession. A practical convoy. Men carry smaller boulders in woven baskets strapped to their backs. The baskets are lined with cloth to prevent chipping. The cloth is checked daily for tears. Because a torn lining means stone rubbing against woven fiber. And fiber abrades jade slowly but surely. Larger boulders travel differently. They are wrapped in multiple layers of coarse fabric. Then lashed to wooden frames. Then loaded onto pack animals, donkeys mostly, occasionally oxen for the heaviest pieces. The animals do not know the value of their burden. But their handlers do. So the handlers walk beside them. They check lashings twice daily. They adjust weight distribution if an animal begins to favor one side. They monitor hoof health obsessively. Because a lame animal stops the caravan. And a stopped caravan delays jade. And delayed jade means workshops sit idle. So animal care becomes jade care. Every 7 to 10 days, the caravan reaches a staging post. Not an inn. A controlled waypoint. Jade is unloaded under supervision. Counted. Inspected for damage. Rewrapped if fabric has worn. The count is critical. At departure, a tally was recorded. At each staging post, the tally is verified. If a piece is missing, questions begin. Not accusations, questions. Was it damaged and discarded? Was the original count wrong? Was there theft? The caravan leader explains. The post keeper records the explanation. The jade continues or does not continue based on whether the explanation satisfies procedure. This is how value moves safely across distance. Not through trust alone. Through counted, recorded, verified procedure. The best jade collection happens in winter. Rivers shrink. Water runs clear and shallow. Boulders that were submerged become visible. Collectors can walk farther into the riverbed without risk of being swept away. They can lift and test more stones in a single day. Winter cold is brutal on hands. Wet hands in cold water go numb quickly. So collectors work in short bursts. Wade in. Test 5 or 6 stones. Return to shore. Warm hands over a small fire. Then wade in again. The fire is not for comfort. The fire is a tool. Warm hands can feel weight differences more accurately. Warm hands can grip wet stone without dropping it. In summer, rivers swell with melt and monsoon rain. The current becomes dangerous. Visibility drops, sediment clouds the water. Collectors stay away. The supply stops. Workshops in Anyang feel this months later. Not as immediate shortage, but as gradual tightening. Fewer new boulders arriving. Overseers managing stock more carefully. Polishers working smaller pieces to stretch supply. This is how distance and season shape your daily work. Not through drama. Through quiet scarcity. When jade reaches Anyang, it does not go directly to workshops. It goes to a central receiving yard. There, specialists inspect again. They unwrap each boulder slowly. They check for cracks that develop during transport. They tap for sound. They assess color and translucency by holding pieces up to sunlight. They sort by quality. Top tier, pale, translucent, no visible flaws reserved for highest status commissions. Middle tier, good color, minor veining acceptable standard workshop stock. Lower tier, darker tones, visible inclusions utilitarian pieces or practice material. Each tier is stored separately. Recorded separately. Allocated separately. You never see this sorting happen. But you feel its effects. When your overseer brings you a piece and says work this carefully, you know it came from top tier. When he says practice your technique, you know it came from lower tier. The words are different. The jade is different. The pressure is different. Large boulders must be broken down before polishing begins. This is not your work. This is the work of boulder breakers, a separate role. They use the oldest technique. Fire and water. Build a small fire against the boulder's surface. Heat it until the stone is hot to touch. Then pour cold water onto the heated area. The rapid temperature change creates stress. Cracks form. Not always where intended. Not always cleanly. But cracks form. Then wooden wedges are driven into the cracks. Tap gently at first. Then harder. The boulder splits. sometimes into 2 large pieces, sometimes into 5 or 6 usable sections, sometimes into fragments too small for anything but grit. The breakers learn to read stone. They learn which boulders split cleanly and which shatter. They learn how much fire is enough and how much is wasteful. They learn that jade from certain riverbeds splits more predictably than jade from others. This knowledge is not written. This knowledge lives in hands and eyes and the quiet accumulation of shattered mistakes. Think of everyone whose labor brings jade to your bench. The winter collector, knees numb in cold water. The first inspector, tapping stones in morning light. The caravan handler, checking animal hooves daily. The staging post keeper, counting boulders by firelight. The receiving yard sorter, holding stone to sunlight. The boulder breaker, heating rock and driving wedges. None of them know your name. None of them see the finished piece you polish. None of them receive direct praise when a commission succeeds. But without them, your bench sits empty. Without them, your skill has no material to perfect. So when you add water to slurry and begin your circles, you inherit a chain of invisible effort. The jade remembers mountains, even if you do not. The jade remembers rivers, even if you never see them. The jade remembers cold hands, long walks, careful counts, and split wedges. And now it remembers your hands too. Your circles. Your patience. Your care. This is what makes jade sacred in a practical way. Not because gods demand it, but because so many people's quiet labor becomes compressed into one small, smooth object. You have never been to Khotan. You have never waded into a winter river. You have never tapped a boulder to hear it ring. But you know this. Some jade cuts more easily than others. Some jade holds a polish longer. Some jade reveals color as you work deeper. And sometimes, very rarely, you find a flaw. A hidden crack. A pocket of softer material. An inclusion that should have been caught during sorting. When that happens, you do not complain. You report it quietly to your overseer. The piece is set aside. Another piece replaces it. And somewhere, far away, someone adjusts their testing method. Because the system learns. Slowly. Imperfectly. But it learns. And the next boulder that arrives might be tested more carefully because of the flaw you found. This is the hidden conversation between source and workshop. Not spoken. Transmitted through failed pieces and adjusted procedures. Now, as you polish, imagine a cold river, flowing westward. A collector waiting in. Tap. Listen. Keep. Your circles echo that rhythm. Circle. Rinse. Keep working. The collector's hands were numb. Your hands are damp. The collector moved slowly to stay safe. You move slowly to stay precise. Different work. Same patience. And when the stone begins to shine, you honor everyone who brought it this far. Not with words. With care. The most powerful thing in your workshop is not metal. It is grit. Abrasive sands and powders are a core element in jade working. Ordinary sands with hard particles, like quartz, can abrade jade when kept wet and moving. The abrasive arrives in humble ways. A basket of sand. A bag of finer powder. A jar of gritty sediment scraped from a useful place. No one celebrates it, but everyone depends on it. Because without abrasive, jade is stubborn silence. With abrasive, jade becomes a surface you can slowly persuade into shine. Water is not just for drinking. Water is a tool. Your slurry needs it. Your rinse bowls need it. Your hands need it, because grit in skin becomes injury. So a water carrier's steps are part of your production rhythm. A jar arrives. You pour a little. You don't waste it. You learn not to splash. The goal is steady dampness enough to keep cutting, enough to keep dust down. The National Palace Museum description makes the principle simple, regardless of tool type: blade, cutting wheel, drill, string tool. Moist abrasive slurry is constantly added to abrade jade. So in your world, water is not background. Water is function. Across the workshop, someone works a string tool. Not to slice like a knife. To grind a line. A hemp string becomes a cutting tool when loaded with sand slurry. It can cut jade because the sand grains do the cutting, not the string itself. The motion is steady. Pull. Return. Pull. No sudden jerks. If they jerk, the string snaps. If the string snaps, a cut line can go wrong. So they move like a comm machine. And when you listen, the sound is similar to your own station. Soft grit. Wet abrasion. Patience as method. Across the workshop, 2 workers operate a string tool. Not to slice like a blade. To grind a line through stone. The string itself does not cut. The string is only a carrier for what cuts: wet sand, loaded and reloaded, pulled back and forth until jade yields. This is abrasion made linear instead of circular. And it requires a different kind of patience. The string is hemp. Thick, twisted, strong. Not wire. Metal is too smooth to hold grit. Not thin thread. Thin fiber snaps under tension. Hemp has texture. Its twisted surface grips slurry. When you load it with wet abrasive and pull it taut, the grit embeds into the fiber's surface irregularities. The string becomes a flexible file. A saw that bends. Fresh hemp is pale, almost golden. Used hemp darkens, stained by jade powder, by repeated slurry application, by the slow grinding contact with stone. You can tell how much work a string has done by its color. Pale equals new or lightly used. Gray-brown equals moderate work. Dark, almost black equals near the end of its useful life. When a string becomes too dark, too smooth from wear, it stops gripping grit effectively. It must be replaced. Not repaired. Replaced entirely. Because a worn string wastes time and abrasive without cutting efficiently. Before cutting begins, the string must be tensioned. 2 workers face each other. Between them, a jade piece held in a simple wooden frame. The string is looped and tied to handles at each end. One worker pulls. The other pulls back. The string goes taut. Not tight enough to snap. Not loose enough to sag. The correct tension feels firm when you pluck it like a musical instrument string, but thicker. If tension is too loose, the string wanders. It cuts a wavy line instead of a straight one. If tension is too tight, the string heats from friction and snaps suddenly. A snapped string mid-cut is costly. The cut line may be ruined. The jade piece may shift and chip. Time is lost rethreading and retensioning. So experienced workers test tension before every cut. They pluck the string. They listen to the sound. They feel the vibration. And they adjust by pulling slightly more or easing slightly back. This calibration happens in seconds. But it determines whether the next hour proceeds smoothly or fails. Once tensioned, the string must be loaded with slurry. A third worker, sometimes an apprentice, holds a small bowl of wet abrasive. The string is pulled taut across the jade. The apprentice dips fingers into slurry. Then runs wet fingers along the string's length. Not once. 3 or 4 passes to ensure even coating. Too much slurry and it drips off before cutting begins. Too little and the string skates across jade without biting. The right amount looks like this. The string glistens. Wet, but not dripping. Grit visible as a pale coating along the fiber. Then the cutting motion begins. One worker pulls the string toward themselves. Slow. Steady. Not jerking. The string moves through jade like a very slow saw blade. When it reaches the end of the pull, when arms are fully extended, the motion reverses. The other worker pulls back. Same speed. Same steadiness. The string moves through the same groove it just created. Back and forth. Back and forth. The sound is soft. A faint hiss when slurry is fresh and cutting. A quiet rasp when grit begins to wear down. Silence when slurry is spent and must be reloaded. The workers do not speak during cutting. They listen. Listening tells them when to pause and reload slurry. Listening tells them if the string is binding, sound becomes strained. Listening tells them if tension has loosened, sound becomes irregular. So the workshop becomes a place of many small sounds. You're polishing circles. The string saws back and forth hiss. The drill's rhythmic turning. Water being poured. Cloth being wrung. All of it quiet. All of it purposeful. A string does not last forever. Constant pulling wears the fiber. Constant abrasive contact frays it. The first sign of failure is not dramatic. It is subtle. The string no longer grips slurry as well. Workers must reload more frequently. Cutting speed slows. Then small fibers begin to separate from the main twist. Tiny loose threads visible along the string's length. At this point, the string should be replaced before the next cut. If workers push it one more session, the string may snap mid-cut. And a mid-cut snap is worse than planned replacement. The jade piece may have a partial groove that is now unusable. The worker's rhythm is broken. Time and material are wasted. So experienced foremen watch string condition closely. They replace proactively. They keep spare string prepared, already cut to length, already knotted to handles. Replacement takes only minutes if prepared. But it saves hours if done before failure. Nearby, Another station uses a different tool, the tubular drill. Not a solid pointed drill. A hollow tube bamboo, cut to size, sharpened at the edge. The tube's purpose is not to remove a solid core like a punch. The tube's purpose is to grind a circular channel, leaving a core that can be extracted later. This is how discs are made, those circular jade rings with central holes that symbolize heaven. The drill does not spin fast. It rotates slowly, methodically, powered by a bow mechanism. The tubular drill starts as bamboo. A section is cut, length depends on how deep the hole must be. The bamboo is naturally hollow, which is why it works. But the edge must be shaped. A craftsman grinds the rim at an angle. Not too steep that makes the edge weak. Not too shallow that makes cutting slow. The ideal angle is about 30 degrees from vertical. This creates a sharp rim that bites when loaded with abrasive. The bamboo is then lashed to a wooden shaft. The shaft connects to a bow similar to a fire-starting bow, but heavier. When the bow is pulled back and forth, the shaft rotates, and the tubular drill turns. The jade piece is secured on a flat surface. The drill is positioned vertically above the intended hole location. An assistant adds slurry to the drill's edge. Not inside the tube on the rim, where cutting happens. Then the operator begins pulling the bow. Back. Forth. Back. Forth. The drill rotates. The abrasive grinds. The jade yields not quickly, but inevitably. Every few rotations, the operator lifts the drill. The assistant adds more slurry. The drill descends again. The sound is deeper than the string saw. A low grinding hum. When slurry is fresh, the sound is rhythmic and steady. When slurry is spent, the sound becomes squeaky, strained. That is the signal to pause and reload. As the drill cuts deeper, a core begins to form inside the hollow tube. A cylinder of jade. Still attached at the bottom, but separated from the surrounding stone by the circular groove. When the drill has cut deep enough, when it has nearly broken through, the operator proceeds carefully. Too much pressure and the core snaps off inside the tube, making extraction difficult. Too little pressure and the cutting stalls. The final breakthrough is felt, not seen. The resistance suddenly decreases. The drill drops slightly. The operator stops immediately. Then the drill is lifted. And the core must be extracted from inside the bamboo tube. Sometimes it falls out easily. Sometimes it is stuck, held by friction or residual slurry. A thin rod is inserted from the opposite end. The core is pushed out gently. It emerges as a small jade cylinder. Not wasted. Not discarded. Cores are collected. Small cores become beads. Larger cores are carved into small ornaments. Nothing is thrown away if it can be shaped. Because jade is valuable. And value is not wasted. Bamboo wears down. The sharp rim becomes dull with use. A dull rim does not grip slurry effectively. Cutting slows. More abrasive is wasted. So the drill's edge must be maintained. At the end of each work session, the operator inspects the rim. If it is dull, it is reground. Not with metal tools, bamboo is too soft for that. with abrasive stone. The same kind used for polishing, but coarser. The rim is rubbed against the stone at the correct angle. A few passes restore sharpness. Then the drill is ready for tomorrow. Bamboo drills do not last as long as metal would. But metal is expensive. Bamboo is renewable. So workshops use bamboo and replace it frequently. This is practical economics. Cheap material, more labor. Expensive material, less labor. The workshop chooses cheap material because labor is available. String sawing and drilling both require coordination between workers. Not silent coordination. Not mind reading. Practical, learned coordination. For the string saw, worker A pulls. Worker B resists just enough to maintain tension, then pulls back. Worker C, apprentice, watches and reloads slurry when the sound changes. For the drill, operator A rotates the drill via bow mechanism. Assistant B adds slurry and monitors the jade piece for shifting. If the piece shifts, drilling stops immediately to resecure it. This division of labor is not hierarchy. It is efficiency. One person cannot maintain string tension while also reloading slurry. One person cannot rotate a drill while also adding abrasive precisely. So tasks split. And workers learn to read each other's rhythm. When worker A's pull slows, worker B knows to reload slurry soon. When the drill's sound changes, assistant B has slurry ready before being asked. This is the invisible language of workshop labor. Not words. Rhythm. Sound. Anticipation. You polish. They saw. They drill. All three methods use the same principle, abrasion. But the application differs. Polishing equals circular motion, broad surface work, creates smoothness. String sawing equals linear motion, creates straight cuts or separate sections. Drilling equals rotational motion, creates holes and circular grooves. Each method has its place. If a bi-disc needs a central hole, rightward arrow drill. If a large jade slab needs to be divided, rightward arrow string saw. If a surface needs to be smooth and lustrous, rightward arrow polish. You cannot polish a hole into existence. You cannot drill a flat surface smooth. You cannot string saw a curve effectively. So the workshop is not a collection of competing methods. It is a collection of complementary tools. And each worker respects the other's roles. Because every finished piece depends on all three methods working correctly. String sawing fails when tension is inconsistent, rightward arrow wavy cut. Slurry is under applied, rightward arrow slow progress, wasted time. String snaps, rightward arrow partial cut, jade may chip, must restart. Drilling fails when drill angle shifts, rightward arrow off center hole. Slurry pools inside tube instead of staying on rim, rightward arrow no cutting. Core breaks prematurely, rightward arrow difficult extraction, possible waste. Polishing fails when grid contaminates with coarser particles, rightward arrow scratches. Pressure is uneven, rightward arrow flat spots, irregular surface. Water balance is wrong, rightward arrow too dry, heat, too wet, no cutting. Each failure has a cause. Each cause has a prevention. and prevention is learned through making mistakes on practice pieces first. Apprentices break cores. Apprentices snap strings. Apprentices scratch polished surfaces. This is expected. This is how knowledge transfers from hands to hands. Not through books. Through broken jade and patient correction. Imagine the string saw's rhythm in your mind. Pull. Return. Pull. Return. The string hisses softly through jade. Like breath. In. Out. In. Out. The workers do not rush. They match their breathing to the pull. Inhale as the string moves forward. Exhale as it returns. And the jade yields not to force, but to repetition. One pull does nothing visible. 100 pulls create a groove. 1000 pulls separate stone. This is the lesson of abrasion. Small effort, repeated calmly, achieves what force cannot. Your polishing circles carry the same truth. Circle. Rinse. Circle. Rinse. And eventually, the stone becomes smooth. Not because you pushed hard. Because you continued steadily. Nearby, a drill turns. Sometimes solid, sometimes tubular. The tool rotates. A little slurry is added. Pressure is constant. Again, the museum description holds. Solid or tube drilling in rotation works with moist abrasives to abrade jade. You watch the operator for a moment. A drill is slow, but it feels more dangerous than polishing. Because drilling concentrates force into one place. One slip and the surface chips. One uneven pressure and the hole wanders. You don't envy that roll. But you respect it. Because your polished finish is meaningless if the drilled opening is ugly or cracked. You return to your own station. You set the jade piece down on a support. You add slurry. You begin your circles. The circle is not random. The circle is a language. Small circles to smooth a ridge. Larger circles to even a plane. Gentle pressure to avoid heating. Firmer pressure when the grit is fresh and biting. The sound tells you everything. A whisper means cutting. A squeak means too dry. Silence means the slurry is spent. So you rinse. You refresh. You begin again. Heat is subtle. It doesn't arrive like fire. It arrives as friction. Jade doesn't like sudden stress. A small crack forms, invisible at first. Then later, it shows itself as a flaw that can't be polished away. So you manage heat by managing everything else. More water. Fresh abrasive. Steady pace. And breaks that are short but regular. This is the artisan's discipline. You stop before your hands start forcing. Forcing is the beginning of breakage. There is a moment you always look for. A moment where the surface stops scattering light in messy directions. Where the scratches align and then fade. Where the piece looks calmer. You hold it at an angle. You let daylight reveal what lamplight hides. You don't call it inspection. But it is inspection. You check edges where chips hide. You check corners where grit can gouge. You check drilled rims where polishing must be controlled so you don't round away the intended shape. Your hands are your measuring tool. Your eyes are your judge. Your workshop uses a technique that will identify Shang Jade for the next 3,000 years. Not because it is beautiful, though it is. Not because it is difficult, though it requires great control. Because it is unique to your time and place. Future scholars will call it raised line carving. But you do not call it anything. You simply know, to make a line stand out, you do not carve the line down. You grind everything else down. Most carving works by removal. You want a line? You cut into the surface along that line. The line becomes a groove. Deeper groove, more visible line. But Shang Jade workers discovered something different. Instead of cutting the line down, leave the line alone. Grind the areas on both sides of the line down. The line stays at the original surface level. Everything around it becomes lower. So the line appears raised, elevated, standing proud of the surrounding surface. This creates a visual effect that is unmistakable. When light hits the jade at an angle, the raised line casts a tiny shadow. The line appears crisp, sharp-edged, more defined than a carved groove would be. And critically, this technique leaves evidence that cannot be faked easily. Because grinding both sides of a line to the same depth, keeping both edges parallel, maintaining consistent line height across an entire piece, that requires skill, time, and a specific grinding tool. Forgers in later centuries will try to carve lines in. But carved lines look different. They are grooves, not ridges. They catch light differently. They accumulate weathering deposits inside, not on top. So when archaeologists 3,000 years from now examine Shang Jade, they will test lines with their fingertips. Raised equals authentic Shang technique. Grooved equals later imitation or different culture. Your hands, right now, are creating a signature that lasts millennia. You do not use your regular polishing tools for this work. You use small grinding sticks, thin bamboo or hardwood rods, about the width of a finger, about the length of your palm. One end is wrapped with coarse cloth. The cloth is dampened, then loaded with slurry but coarser grit than your polishing slurry. You want material removal, not surface smoothing. The grinding stick is held like a writing brush. Not gripped tightly, that creates uneven pressure. Held gently, with control coming from wrist and fingers, not arm strength. This is detail work. Precision work. The kind of work that makes your hand ache after an hour because you are maintaining fine control continuously. Before grinding begins, the line must be marked. A master carver uses charcoal or a fine brush with diluted pigment. They draw the line on the jade surface. This line is sacred. Everything on the line must remain at original surface height. Everything beside the line will be ground down. If you accidentally grind across the line, you destroy the raised effect. So apprentices do not do this work. Only workers who have proven hand control and patience. The mark is thin, narrower than the final line will be. Because the line's width comes not from the mark, but from how far to each side you grind. If the final line should be 2 finger widths wide, you grind 2 finger widths to the left and 2 finger widths to the right. The mark is just the center reference. You position the grinding stick beside the marked line. Not on it. Beside it. Then you begin small circular motions. Clockwise or counterclockwise does not matter. Consistency matters. The circles are tiny, about the size of a small coin. Overlapping. Slow. Each circle removes a microscopic amount of jade. You are not trying to remove material quickly. You are trying to remove material evenly. After 10 circles in one spot, you move slightly along the line's length. 10 more circles. Move again. Gradually, the area beside the line becomes lower than the line itself. But the change is so subtle at first that you cannot see it. You can only feel it. Your fingertips brush across the line and the adjacent area. Is there a height difference yet? Not at first. You continue. More circles. More slurry reloading. More patient grinding. Then after perhaps an hour your fingertip catches a tiny ridge. The line is beginning to rise. Not because the line grew. Because everything around it sank. The most difficult aspect is not grinding one side down. It is grinding both sides down to the same depth. So the line's edges remain parallel. If you grind the left side deeper than the right, the line tilts. It no longer looks crisp. It looks sloppy, a matte. Urish. So you work both sides in alternation. 10 circles on the left. 10 circles on the right. Check with fingertips. 10 more on the left. 10 more on the right. The goal is symmetry. Not measured symmetry, you have no rulers here. Felt symmetry. When your fingertip travels across the line from left to right, it should rise and fall in a smooth, even profile. Up to the line. Down from the line. No wobble. No uneven transitions. This is where hand feel separates skilled workers from beginners. Beginners can see when a line is uneven. Skilled workers can feel unevenness before it becomes visible. And feeling it early means correcting it before it becomes a problem. How deep should you grind the surrounding area? Not deep enough, and the line barely stands out. Too deep, and you create a channel that looks carved, not raised. The ideal depth is subtle. About the thickness of a fingernail. Maybe slightly more for larger pieces. Maybe slightly less for delicate ornaments. You learn this through experience. Your first attempts, you grind too deep, trying to make the line very obvious. But very obvious looks crude. The best raised lines are understated. They catch light beautifully. But they do not dominate the piece. They enhance form without overwhelming it. So you learn restraint. You learn to stop grinding sooner than your impatience wants. Because restraint is what creates refinement. When two lines intersect, when a design includes corners or crossing patterns, the difficulty multiplies. Because now you must grind around both lines without disturbing either. Imagine two lines forming a right angle. You grind beside line A. You grind beside line B. But at the corner where they meet, you must grind the area that is beside both lines simultaneously. This requires acute control. Your grinding stick must navigate the corner precisely. Too far toward line A, and you encroach on line B. Too far toward line B, and you damage line A. So corner work is slower, more careful, more checking with fingertips. And when finished, a well-executed corner has crisp edges. The lines meet cleanly. The raised intersection forms a small plateau. The surrounding areas are evenly lowered. This is the mark of a master. Apprentices create corners that look rounded, soft, imprecise. Masters create corners that look sharp, intentional, confident. A raised line must maintain consistent width along its entire length. If the line narrows and widens unpredictably, it looks like a mistake. So you measure constantly, not with tools, but with your eyes and hands. You step back. You view the jade from different angles. You hold it up to light. Does the line look consistent? Or does it waver? If it wavers, you adjust by grinding more on the side that makes the line too wide. This narrows the line back to the target width. But adjustment must be done carefully. Overcorrection creates new problems. So you work in small increments. Grind a little. Check. Grind a little more. Check again. Patience prevents mistakes. Rushing creates flaws that take days to correct or cannot be corrected at all. Once the lines are raised and the surrounding areas are ground to proper depth, the piece is not finished. Now it must be polished. But polishing around raised lines is delicate work. You cannot use broad circular motions. Broad motions will round the line's crisp edges. So you must polish carefully. Use smaller circles. Use lighter pressure. Keep your motion within the lowered areas. Do not let your polishing tool climb onto the raised lines. This requires constant vigilance. One careless pass and you soften an edge. So polishing around raised lines takes longer than polishing a plain surface. Much longer. But the result is worth it. A polished surface that is smooth and lustrous, with raised lines that remain sharp-edged and precisely defined. The contrast between the smooth background and the crisp lines creates visual clarity. The jade looks refined, controlled, intentional. This is what distinguishes Shang craftsmanship from earlier, rougher jade work. Not just that jade is carved, but that it is carved with geometric precision and aesthetic restraint. 3,000 years from now, archaeologists and collectors will examine jade pieces. They will ask, is this authentic Shang? Or a later imitation? One of the tests they will use is the raised line technique. Because fakers, even skilled ones, tend to carve lines in, not grind surfaces down. Carving in is faster. Carving in is easier. Carving in looks similar to casual observers. But to trained eyes or trained fingertips the difference is clear. Carved lines are grooves. They go below the surface. When you run your finger across, you feel a dip. Raised lines are ridges. They stay at or above the original surface. When you run your finger across, you feel a rise. Additionally, burial weathering affects them differently. Grooved lines accumulate sediment inside. Raised lines accumulate weathering on top, where the edges are. The accumulation pattern tells experts whether the line was carved down or ground around. So your technique, this tedious, time-consuming, precision-demanding technique, becomes a signature. Not an intentional signature. Just a natural consequence of how you work. But it is enough to distinguish your era's jade from all others. And that distinction gives your work value across millennia. Apprentices watch this work but do not attempt it for years. They are not forbidden. They are simply not ready. Raised line work requires hand control that comes only from thousands of hours of polishing practice. So they watch. They see how the master loads the grinding stick with slurry. They see the tiny circular motions. They see the constant checking with fingertips. They see the patience when progress is slow. And they learn the most important lesson. This work cannot be rushed. It cannot be forced. It can only be done with calm, sustained attention. When an apprentice finally receives their first raised line assignment, usually a simple straight line on a practice piece, they understand why they waited. Because the first attempt is humbling. The line wavers. The edges are uneven. One side is deeper than the other. But the master does not criticize harshly. The master simply says, "Try again. Slower this time." And the apprentice tries again. And again. Until their hands learn what their eyes cannot teach. Imagine your fingertip brushing across a raised line. Smooth surface. Then a gentle rise like a tiny hill. Then a gentle fall back to smooth surface. The transition is so subtle it is almost dreamlike. Not a sharp edge. A soft elevation. This is the rhythm you create. Grind beside the line. Circle. 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 Move along. Circle. 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 And slowly, imperceptibly, the line rises. Not because you add material. Because you remove everything else. This is the paradox of creation. Sometimes making something stand out means lowering everything around it. Sometimes prominence comes not from building up, but from clearing away. Your hand circles. The jade yields. And the line emerges not carved, but revealed. You are not a wandering craftsperson in a free market. This is organized. At Yin Ruin/Yingsu, late Shang capital, sources describe specialized workshop areas, including jade production, organized and controlled within a larger system. That structure shows up in small ways. Who gets what material? Who is allowed to take finished pieces? Who can enter certain storage areas? Who speaks to overseers? And who stays silent and works? You feel the hierarchy without needing to discuss politics. The hierarchy is simply the shape of your day. Finished pieces do not sit around. They disappear into controlled spaces. Not because of mystery. Because of theft. Because of substitution. Because the smallest object can represent enormous value in an elite/ritual context. Yingsu is a royal capital with palaces, ancestral temple areas, and discovered workshops and tombs. It's a setting where elite goods mattered. So the workshop develops habits. Wrap finished pieces in cloth. Move them quickly. Store them away. Record them in whatever system your overseers use. Silence protects value. I won't invent your wage, but I will keep the economics honest. In a centralized workshop system, compensation often looks like stability rations, allocation, protection, predictable work. You don't get rich. You get sustained. Your household eats because your work stays useful. And usefulness inside a controlled production world is a kind of currency. Not romantic. Real. You return home with softened fingers from water and grit. Your wife sees the powder at the nail beds. Children notice how you wash slowly, carefully, as if your hands are tools that must last. The food is simple. The talk is ordinary. You don't narrate empire. You narrate weather, work, and tomorrow's needs. And in that simplicity, there is calm. When the day has structure, the mind rests easier. Back at the bench in memory, the loop begins again. Add slurry. Circle. Circle. Rinse. Wipe. Circle. The sound is soft. The motion is small. The result is slow. And the slow result is the point. Because Jade teaches the lesson your listeners come for. Nothing precious is made quickly. Not the stone. Not the shine. Not sleep. Some mornings the slurry looks perfect and behaves wrong. It has the right thickness, the right wet shine, yet the sound is off. A faint squeak. A drag that shouldn't be there. You stop immediately, because experienced polishers learn a rule. When the sound changes, the surface is being rewritten. You lift the jade piece and rinse it. And there it is. A single thin scratch, not deep, but visible when you tilt it toward light. One grain. One wrong grain. Grit contamination isn't dramatic, but it's costly. Because polishing is not only making the surface smoother. Polishing is removing evidence of yesterday's tool marks without adding new ones. So you clean your station like a ritual. Wipe the slab. Rinse the bowl. Replace the cloth. Strain the slurry through a finer weave. Then you begin again. Not angry. Methodical. Not all abrasive is equal. Coarser grit removes faster and leaves deeper scratches. Finer grit removes slower and leaves a calmer surface. So the day has stages. You don't jump to fine too early. Fine grit cannot erase deep scratches quickly. It only smooths what's already nearly smooth. So you climb the staircase in the right order. Coarse to shape and level. Medium to refine. Fine to quiet the surface. Then a final pass to make the object feel like it has no roughness at all. This is how the work stays efficient without rushing. Sequence replaces speed. Not all sand is equal. Some sand cuts jade. Some sand only scratches it. Some sand does nothing at all. Learning the difference is what separates apprentices from masters. This is the quiet science of grit. Your workshop keeps grit in 3 separate containers. Coarse grit looks almost like tiny pebbles when dry quartz-rich sand from specific riverbeds. This grade removes material quickly, leaves deep scratches, sounds harsh, a gritty rasp. You use it first to level surfaces, remove rough tool marks, shape edges. But you do not linger. One careless pass creates a flat spot that takes days to correct. Medium grit feels different, smaller particles, still visible if you look closely. The sound changes, less rasp, more whisper. This grade refines what coarse began, removes deep scratches, reveals jade's color more clearly. You spend the most time here. This is where mistakes from coarse get erased. This is where shape becomes trustworthy. Fine grit feels almost like powder when dry. Individual particles nearly invisible. When wet, the slurry looks like pale milk, cloudy, smooth, almost soft. The sound becomes a gentle hush. This grade does not remove material aggressively. It quiets the surface, erases last faint scratches, creates the beginning of shine. You finish here with time and patience and repeated gentle circles. Grit does not arrive ready to use. It arrives as raw sand. A grit preparer, someone you rarely see but whose work you depend on, sorts it using a simple but slow process. Pour sand into water. Stir. Let it settle. Heaviest particles sink first. Lighter particles sink slower. Finest particles stay suspended longest. At each stage, the preparer scoops sediment from the bottom. Dries it. Tests it by taking a sample, mixing with water, rubbing on scrap jade. Feel texture. Listen to sound. Observe how quickly it abrades. If it cuts well, rightward arrow, coarse container. If it cuts moderately, rightward arrow, medium. If it barely cuts but smooths nicely, rightward arrow, fine. If it does not cut at all, rightward arrow, discarded. This sorting is continuous because grit supply varies. Rivers flood and bring new sediment. Quarries yield different sand depending on where they dig. So the preparer constantly adjusts, tests, maintains the three grades. You never thank this person. But without them, your three containers would be filled with random sand. And random sand creates random results. The best grit comes from rivers flowing through mountainous regions where hard stone erodes. Quartz is key. Quartz is harder than jade, so quartz-rich sand abrades jade effectively. Sand from lowland rivers, softer sedimentary areas, is often too gentle. It may feel gritty but lacks cutting power, wears out quickly into useless powder before removing enough jade. Some workshops access crushed stone. When harder rock is quarried or shaped, fragments are collected, pounded into smaller pieces, sorted by size using the same settling method. Crushed stone grit is often sharper than river sand, cuts faster but wears out faster, breaking into finer particles more quickly. So it is expensive, reserved for important pieces, used sparingly. Your overseer decides when it is justified. You do not request it. You accept what is provided and learn to make river sand work efficiently. When you rinse jade, the water you pour off is not thrown away immediately. It contains suspended grit particles, jade powder, fine dust from abrade stone, sometimes cloth fiber bits. This mixture settles in a collection basin. At day's end, someone skims top water off. The sediment at bottom is examined. If grit particles are still large enough to be useful, they are dried and returned to circulation, usually downgraded one step. Coarse grit that has worn down becomes medium. Medium that has broken down becomes fine. Fine grit that is spent becomes waste. But jade powder has value too. Not for polishing jade, it is too soft. But jade powder mixed with finer abrasive creates a slurry gentler than pure grit alone. Some finishers prefer this for final polishing stages. It reduces risk of creating new scratches while removing last faint marks. So even waste finds use. Not because the workshop is noble. Because abrasive is expensive. And expensive materials are never truly wasted if they can be repurposed. You learn to hear grit quality without looking. Coarse grit working properly sounds like steady rasp, rhythmic, almost musical. If sound becomes squeaky rightward arrow slurry too dry, add water. If sound becomes silent rightward arrow grit worn out, add fresh abrasive. Medium grit sounds softer, gentle hiss like sand sliding over stone. If it squeaks rightward arrow contaminated, likely a coarse particle got into medium slurry. Stop immediately. Rinse everything. Start again with clean medium grit. Fine grit sounds like a whisper, almost inaudible, the quietest stage. If you hear anything louder than soft breath, something is wrong, either grit not fine enough, or larger particle contaminated slurry, or you press too hard. So you listen. And listening becomes quality control that requires no inspection, no overseer, no external judgment. The stone tells you when work is right. The greatest danger is not using wrong grit. It is mixing grits accidentally. One coarse particle in fine grit slurry creates a deep scratch. One scratch ruins hours of careful work. So preventing contamination is ritual. Each grit grade has its own container, clearly marked. Each grade has its own scoop never shared. Each grade has its own mixing bowl never swapped. When you finish with coarse and move to medium, you do not simply rinse hands. You wash hands thoroughly. Check under fingernails for trapped particles. Wipe work slab completely clean. Rinse your rinse bowl. Then and only then open the medium grit container. This ritual feels excessive at first. But one contamination incident teaches you, the ritual is not excessive. The ritual is minimum necessary care. Because grit is invisible once mixed into slurry. You cannot see it. You can only feel its effects. And by the time you feel a scratch forming, the damage is done. Not every polisher has unlimited access to all three grades. Grit is rationed. Apprentices get coarse and medium. They do not get fine until they prove they will not waste it. Masters get all three grades. They also get first access to fresh shipments. High-status commissions get priority for crushed stone grit. Ordinary workshop pieces get river sand. This hierarchy exists because abrasive is labor-intensive to prepare, expensive to transport, difficult to replace when supply disrupts. So your overseer monitors usage. Not to punish waste. To ensure the workshop can continue operating when grit shipments delay. If you use grit efficiently, stretch coarse longer before moving to medium, recycle slurry properly, do not contaminate batches, you earn trust. Trust means better access. Better access means better tools. Better tools mean better results. This is how grit becomes currency in a quiet, non-monetary way. You do not pay for grit directly. But grit has cost. Collectors must be paid or provided rations to gather sand from distant riverbeds. Preparers must be supported while they sort and test. Transport must be arranged when sand comes from far sources. Storage must be maintained dry, clean, protected from contamination. So when your overseer rations grit, he is not being stingy. He is managing a supply chain you never see. A supply chain that can break in many places. Floods wash away known sand deposits. Dry seasons make distant rivers inaccessible. Quarry workers prioritize stone cutting over sand collection. Transport routes close during conflict or seasonal impassability. Each disruption ripples through months of workshop production. Because grit, unlike jade, cannot be stockpiled infinitely. It degrades if stored wet. It clumps if stored in humid conditions. It becomes contaminated if stored carelessly. So the workshop maintains only a modest reserve. Enough for steady work. Not enough for crisis. This fragility is why grit discipline matters. Why you do not waste slurry. Why you clean tools obsessively. Why you treat abrasive with same respect you show jade. Grit collection follows seasons. Winter and early spring are best. Rivers run clear. Sediment settles predictably. Collectors can work long hours without heat exhaustion. Summer monsoons disrupt everything. Rivers swell and turn muddy. Sediment becomes mixed, chaotic, unpredictable. Collectors stay away. So grit supply is abundant in spring, scarce in late summer. The workshop adapts. In spring, apprentices practice freely. Mistakes are tolerated because grit is plentiful. Slurry is replaced frequently to keep cutting power high. In late summer, practice slows. Only essential work proceeds. Slurry is recycled more aggressively. Masters revert to techniques using less abrasive longer polishing sessions with lighter pressure, more water, more patience. You learn both modes. Abundance does not make you careless. Scarcity does not make you paralyzed. You simply adjust rhythm. Because work must continue. And work continues through adaptation, not complaint. Imagine the grit preparer's basin. Pour sand into water. Stir. Watch particles swirl, cloud, dance. Then stop stirring. Let stillness return. Heavy particles sink first, slow, inevitable. Medium particles follow, drifting downward like snow. Fine particles linger, suspended in pale water, taking their time. This is the rhythm you carry into polishing, fast cutting when you need it. Moderate refinement when you are ready. Gentle finishing when surface asks for quiet. Not rushed. Not forced. Just the natural settling of effort into result. Your hand circles. The grit whispers. The jade smooths. And everything stone, abrasive, water, time finds its proper place. The most important moment is not the moment you rub. It's the moment you stop. You stop and look. You tilt the jade. You let light skim it. You run a fingertip across an edge. You feel a tiny ridge your eyes might miss. The pause prevents weeks of regret. Because once an edge is rounded too far, it cannot be unrounded. Once a corner is softened by mistake, the geometry is changed forever. So you learn the discipline of stopping early and often. In a sleep story, this becomes a calming lesson. The pause is not laziness. The pause is mastery. If your piece has a drilled hole or a carved opening, the rim is delicate. Polish too aggressively and you round it away. Polish unevenly and it looks lopsided. So you change your hand pressure the way a musician changes volume. Light. Careful. Short strokes that follow the curve. You rotate the piece instead of forcing your wrist into an awkward angle. You rinse frequently so grit doesn't pile at the rim and bite too hard. This is where you prove you're a finisher. You can make something smooth without making it shapeless. At the drill station, the tool turns slowly. The sound is different from yours, deeper, more rhythmic. A tube drill doesn't take out a plug of stone like a clean cut. It grinds a circular channel, leaving a core that may later be removed. The operator feeds slurry carefully, not constantly. Too much slurry and the drill skates. Too little and it heats and binds. You watch because drilling teaches you something about polishing. Everything here is the same skill wearing different clothes. Abrasion. Water. Patience. The overseer returns. He doesn't compliment shine. He asks what is finished. What is nearly finished? What is delayed? He looks at your hands like they're tools, not like they're people. And you accept it, because you understand the logic. A controlled workshop does not survive on inspiration. It survives on delivery. So you respond with the calm language of work. This piece is in fine grit stage. This one needs rim correction. This one is ready for wrapping. You don't argue. You don't perform. You just keep the day moving. Near midday, someone can't find a drill bow, or a string tool, or a small chisel. It doesn't matter which tool, the pattern is the same. A missing tool creates tension. Tension creates accusations. Accusations stop work. So the foreman uses procedure. All bundles opened. All cloth wraps checked. The storage corner searched. No shouting. No public blame. Then the tool appears misplaced, wrapped into the wrong bundle. A quiet reminder follows. Tools return to your own cloth. Cloth is tied. Counts happen at day's end. The shop breathes again. Work resumes. And your mind, like the listener's mind, learns that calm systems solve problems better than noise. When a piece reaches the final finish, your posture changes. You stop treating it as work in progress. You treat it as value. You rinse it more carefully. You dry it gently. You don't drag cloth across it with grit still embedded. You hold it closer to light. You check for that last thin scratch. You check edges and corners. Then you apply the quiet professional test. Would I sign my name to this, if names mattered here? If the answer is yes, you move to wrapping. Wrapping isn't decoration. It's protection. Cloth prevents accidental chipping. Cloth hides the object from casual eyes. Cloth keeps the surface from rubbing against basket fibers. You wrap in layers. Not too tight, not too loose. You knot it the same way every time, so you know if it's been opened. If your workshop is controlled, then the path from bench to storage must also be controlled. A wrapped piece travels quieter. Quiet is safety. You do not carry finished jade into the world like a trophy. You pass it into hands that are part of the chain. A keeper checks the wrap, checks the shape, checks the count. Sometimes marks are made. Sometimes spoken acknowledgement is enough. Then the piece disappears into a safer space where fewer hands reach, where the wrong kind of curiosity is kept away. This is how elite materials survive. Not by being loved, but by being managed. The biggest thefts aren't dramatic robberies. They're small substitutions. A slightly lower quality piece swapped for a better one. A wrap opened and retied. A piece misplaced during transfer. So your security is procedural. Consistent knots. Consistent wrapping. Consistent counts. Consistent storage access. You don't stare suspiciously at co-workers. You trust the system more than trust the mood. Because moods change. Systems hold. Some days the calamity isn't political. It's environmental. A sudden heavy rain floods paths and makes the workshop damp. Damp makes cloth mold. Mold ruins wraps. Humidity makes abrasive clump. Or the opposite, dry wind carries dust, and dust contaminates slurry. So you adapt again. Change where water jars sit. Move grid to higher shelves. Cover bowls when not used. Rinse more often. Work in smaller batches. The craft survives because it can flex. Not because it can fight. At home, the world is smaller. Your wife has patched clothing again. A child has torn a hem. A pot needs cleaning. Water must be carried. You sit and eat quietly. The meal is modest. But there is calm in modest meals because they are predictable. Your hands are tender from wet abrasion work. Your wife notices, and she says little. She puts water near you. That is love in a labor world. Not speeches. Small acts that keep tomorrow possible. A child asks what you do. You don't give a lecture. You show them your hands. You show them how stone dust hides in nail beds. You show them how a small circle becomes a smoother surface. You let them rub a plain stone with wet sand, not jade, not valuable, just a teaching object. They learn the lesson immediately. Hard things take time. And they also learn something deeper. Time is not only waiting. Time is a tool. Wet grit is rough on skin. Small cuts happen. Not dramatic. Just tiny openings that sting when slurry touches them. So you wash. You dry carefully. You wrap a finger if needed. You sleep earlier. Because your hands must work tomorrow. And skilled hands are an asset the household depends on. In this world, taking care of your body isn't luxury. It's maintenance. Now return to the bench in your mind. A bowl of water. A pinch of grit. A jade surface weighting. You add slurry. You begin circles. Circle. 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 You rinse. You wipe. You begin again. Circle. 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 The sound is soft. The motion is small. The result is slow. And your breathing follows the pace. In. Out. Circle. Circle. Nothing needs to be solved now. Nothing needs to be rushed. Just the steady whisper of grit on stone. Patient enough to turn hardness into shine. Gentle enough to carry you into sleep. Some pieces are ordinary workshop flow. Others arrive wrapped tighter, handled with more silence. No one announces why. But everyone feels it. A high-status commission doesn't need a crown in the room to create pressure. It creates pressure through behavior. The foreman checks more often. The keeper counts twice. The water carrier is told not here and this bowl only. The abrasive is measured instead of scooped freely. The jade itself may not look different at first. But the air around it does. And in that altered air, your job becomes even simpler. Do the same circles as always. But with fewer mistakes allowed. A messenger arrives at the workshop entrance. Not a regular overseer. Someone from outside. Dressed more formally. Carrying a sealed cloth bundle. The foreman receives him quietly. Words are exchanged. The bundle is opened. And everyone in the workshop understands without being told. A tomb commission has arrived. Someone of status has died. And the jade must be perfect. The messenger does not stay long. He delivers the bundle. He speaks briefly with the foreman. Then he leaves. But his visit changes the workshop's rhythm for days, sometimes weeks. The bundle contains a piece of cloth marked with dimensions. Sometimes a small wooden model showing the desired shape. Sometimes written characters indicating purpose, burial, offering, accompaniment. And always, implicitly, the understanding that this is not ordinary work. This is funerary work. The jade will be placed with the dead. It will accompany someone into the afterlife. It will be seen by ancestors and spirits. So it must be flawless. Not good enough. Flawless. The foreman studies the cloth marks and model carefully. He translates specifications into workshop language. If the mark shows a bi-disc, diameter must be precise, measured with chords marked at regular intervals. Central hole must be perfectly circular, drilled with the best tubular drill, not a damaged one. Surface must be polished to high luster, no shortcuts, no settling for smooth enough. If the mark shows a concave, 4 sides must be symmetrical, each corner ground to the same height. Interior hole must be straight, drilled vertically without drift. Raised line patterns must align perfectly on all 4 faces, any misalignment visible when viewed from above. If the mark shows personal ornaments, pendants, hairpins, small blades, edges must be crisp, no rounded corners from careless polishing. Drill holes must be smooth, no rough edges that would catch on thread or fabric. Color must be carefully selected, pale jade for certain ranks, darker shades for others. The foreman does not guess. He refers to previous commissions. He consults with senior workers. He asks questions if any detail is unclear. Because misunderstanding a specification is worse than admitting ignorance. For tomb commissions, the foreman does not grab any available jade. He goes to the highest quality storage. The jade reserved for elite work. He examines multiple pieces. He taps them to hear tone. Clearest ring indicates best structure. He holds them to light to check translucency. More translucent equals higher status association. He inspects for flaws, tiny cracks, inclusions, color irregularities. Any flaw, no matter how small, disqualifies the piece. Because tomb jade is not just functional. It is symbolic. It represents the deceased status. It demonstrates the family's resources and devotion. It shows respect for ancestors. So only flawless material is acceptable. The foreman may examine 10 pieces before selecting one. The 9 rejected pieces return to storage. They are still good jade. But they are not good enough for this. Not every polisher is assigned tomb work. The foreman selects carefully. He chooses workers who have demonstrated consistent quality, no history of scratched surfaces or rounded edges. Patience, no rushing, no shortcuts. Focus, ability to work for hours without attention drifting. Reliability, showing up every day, not disappearing for personal matters. If you are selected, it is an honor. But it is also pressure. Because if you fail, if you scratch the surface, if you chip an edge, if you create any flaw, the consequences extend beyond you. Your failure reflects on the foreman who chose you. Your failure reflects on the workshop's reputation. Your failure may mean the workshop receives fewer elite commissions in the future. So being selected is both validation and burden. Ordinary commissions have flexible timelines. If a piece takes an extra week, it delays delivery but does not create crisis. Tomb commissions are different. Death has already occurred. Burial will happen on a specific date determined by ritual calendars and divination. The jade must be finished before burial. Not almost finished. Completely finished, polished, inspected, approved, and delivered. This creates urgency. But urgency cannot compromise quality. So you work longer hours. You arrive earlier. You stay later. But you do not rush. Rushing creates mistakes. Mistakes create delays for corrections, or worse, complete failures requiring starting over. So you maintain the same careful pace. You just apply that pace for more hours each day. The foreman monitors progress closely. If he sees you are falling behind schedule, he may assign an assistant. The assistant handles water, slurry preparation, tool cleaning. This frees you to focus entirely on polishing. Every minute saved on secondary tasks is a minute you can apply to the jade. For ordinary pieces, the overseer inspects weekly. For tomb pieces, inspections happen daily. Sometimes multiple times per day. The overseer does not micromanage. He does not tell you how to work. But he checks progress. He examines the surface under different light angles. He feels edges with his fingertips. he looks for any developing problems. If he sees a potential issue, a slight unevenness forming, a patch that seems less polished than the rest, he mentions it. Not as criticism, as early warning. So you can correct it now, while correction is easy. Rather than discovering it later, when correction is difficult or impossible. You welcome these inspections. Not because you enjoy being watched. Because they prevent catastrophic late-stage failures. You do not attend burials. You do not see where the jade goes after it leaves the workshop. But you know the general context. Jade is placed with the deceased in the tomb. Sometimes in the hands. Sometimes near the head. Sometimes arranged around the body. The jade serves multiple purposes. Symbolic represents purity, immortality, connection between earth and heaven. Protective, believed to prevent body decay, protect the spirit. Status, demonstrates the deceased's rank and the family's wealth. So the jade you polish is not decorative. It is functional in a spiritual sense. And spiritual function demands perfection. Because imperfection might offend ancestors. Imperfection might fail to protect the deceased. Imperfection might bring shame to the family. You do not know if these beliefs are true. But you know the people commissioning the work believe them. And their belief creates your responsibility. When the tomb piece is finished, polished, inspected, approved, it does not leave the workshop casually. A delivery protocol is followed. The jade is wrapped in the finest cloth available. Not coarse work fabric. Fine, clean cloth reserved for elite pieces. The wrapping is done in front of the foreman. He watches to ensure proper handling. No rough movements. No dropping. The wrapped jade is placed in a wooden box. The box is sealed with a tied cord. Then 2 workers, not one, carry the box to the delivery location. 2 workers ensure. If one stumbles, the other maintains control. If questions arise about handling, there is a witness. If theft is attempted, 2 people are harder to overpower than 1. The workers do not dawdle. They do not stop for conversation. They walk directly to the destination. They hand the box to the designated receiver. The receiver opens it in their presence. Inspects the jade. If satisfied, the receiver acknowledges receipt. Only then do the workers return to the workshop. This protocol is not paranoia. It is respect. For the jade. For the deceased. For the workshop's reputation. Elite families remember quality. If a workshop delivers excellent tomb jade, that family returns for future needs. They also recommend the workshop to other families. So one successful tomb commission can lead to many more. But the opposite is also true. One poor tomb piece discovered after burial, or worse, discovered before burial and rejected, damages reputation. The family will not return. They will tell other families, that workshop failed us at our time of need. And future commissions dry up. So tomb work is never routine. Each piece is an opportunity to build or maintain reputation. Each piece is also a risk. The foreman knows this. The workers know this. Everyone approaches tomb jade with heightened attention. Not fear. Respect. The jade you polish for a tomb will be buried, placed in darkness, covered by earth, unseen by living eyes after the burial ceremony. You will never receive public praise. Your name will not be associated with the piece. No one will point to it and say, "That polisher did excellent work." And yet, you feel pride. Not loud pride. Quiet pride. The pride of knowing you did your best work on something that will never earn you visible recognition. You polished it perfectly not because someone would inspect it forever, but because it mattered. To the deceased. To the family. To the workshop. To yourself. This is the craftsman's paradox. The best work is often the work no one sees. The most careful effort goes into pieces that disappear. And yet that invisibility does not diminish the effort. Because the standard is internal. The standard is, did I do this as well as I possibly could? And when the answer is yes, that is enough. Even if no one else ever knows. Imagine the jade in your hands. Smooth. Cool. Luminous. You know it will be buried. You know no one will see your final polishing pass. And yet you make that final pass with the same care as the first. Because the work is not for an audience. The work is for the work. Circle. Rinse. Circle. Rinse. The motion is meditation. The result is peace. Not because others will praise you, but because you will know you cared. Even when caring was invisible. Especially when caring was invisible. This is the deepest form of integrity. Doing your best work when no one is watching. Maintaining standards when shortcuts would never be noticed. Honoring the task even when the task will disappear. Your hand circles one last time. The jade gleams. And you set it down gently. Ready for wrapping. Ready for burial. Ready to accompany someone you never met into a place you will never see. But perfect. Because it mattered. The most calming truth is also the most practical. A prestigious piece is still stone. It still responds to grit and water and time. So you don't treat it like a sacred object. You treat it like a precise one. You shorten your polishing passes. You rinse more frequently. You replace cloth sooner. You refuse to power through fatigue. Because if you chip an edge on an ordinary piece, you lose time. If you chip an edge on this piece, you may lose trust. And trust is the real currency in a controlled workshop. The foreman doesn't shout. They tighten procedure. A simple checklist appears without being written. 1 fresh slurry for the important piece only. 2 no shared rinse bowl. 3 tool wraps remain tied when not in hand. 4 piece never left unattended. 5 2-person transfer at delivery. You don't argue. You appreciate it. Because strict procedure feels harsh only until you see what it prevents. It prevents the day from turning chaotic. It prevents suspicion from eating the team. It keeps sleep possible. The same threat always returns: contamination. A grain too large. A bit of dust. A hardened lump of slurry. But now, instead of frustration, you feel only method. You isolate the piece. You clean the slab again. You replace the water. You strain the grit. You restart from an earlier grit stage to remove the scratch properly, rather than trying to hide it with finer work. This is one of your biggest quality edges over competitors. You show the craft's honesty. You show that good work sometimes means stepping back. And stepping back is not failure. Stepping back is control. Politics rarely arrives as speeches for you. Politics arrives as supply. Abrasive grit is more plentiful some weeks than others. Tool edges get repaired slower when metal work is busy elsewhere. Water is carried from different places if channels change. If a building program surges, workshop pressure surges. You don't need to name the reason. You only need to show the effect. Less spare abrasive. Tighter monitoring. Faster transfers. Fewer mistakes tolerated. This is how large systems feel from the bench. Not like ideology. Like shortage. In wet season, water is abundant. But abundance has its own trouble. Humidity keeps cloth damp. Damp cloth grows stale. Stale cloth contaminates surfaces. Grit clumps. Slurry thickens without warning. So you dry things more intentionally. You store grit higher. You cover bowls when you step away. You keep wraps cleaner. Wet season is generous, but it requires discipline. Because dampness is a slow saboteur. In dry stretches, water is precious. And precious water changes the workshop rhythm. Rinses become more deliberate. Bowl water is reused longer. You wipe rather than rinse when you can. But you never compromise the surface of an important piece. You may skip comfort, but you don't skip cleanliness. Because a scratch costs more water than prevention ever does. So you become careful in a different way. Not lavish. Efficient. Your household tracks seasons too. Not by numbers. By what's available. By what costs more. By what breaks faster. In humid months, clothing needs more drying and more repair. In dry months, skin cracks more easily from constant washing. Children cough more when dust rises. Your wife adjusts meals. Adjusts chores. Adjusts expectations. And the household becomes a second workshop. Quiet systems. Quiet maintenance. Quiet survival. A tiny cut opens on a fingertip. Wet grit finds it instantly. The sting is sharp, then dull. You pause. You rinse. You wrap the finger. Not thickly thick wrap makes you clumsy. Just enough. Because a small cut ignored becomes infection. And infection takes your hands away from work. In an ancient labor world, hands are livelihood. So you treat the cut with respect. Not fear. Respect. There's a dangerous moment in polishing. When the piece looks nearly done. The surface is calm. The shape is clean. And your mind whispers, just a little more. That whisper causes mistakes. So you do what professionals do. You stop before the urge to overwork. You rinse. You inspect under light. You feel edges. Then you decide. Is the final pass needed? Or is the final pass only ego? If it's ego, you stop. If it's needed, you proceed with the lightest possible touch. Delivery day for the important piece is quieter than usual. 2 sets of eyes watch the wrap. 2 sets of hands handle the basket. No one wants to be alone with it. Not because they're guilty. Because responsibility shared is safer. The keeper checks the knot. Checks the cloth edge. Checks the count. And you stand still while they do it. Stillness is part of professionalism. You don't rush the handoff. You let the system do what it's designed to do. The storage space is calmer than the workshop. Less sound. Less grid. Less movement. Objects rest there like sleeping animals, contained, quiet, protected. Access is limited. Not to create mystery. To reduce variables. Fewer hands means fewer accidents. Fewer accidents means fewer arguments. And fewer arguments means the workshop keeps producing. People talk. They always talk. They speculate about where pieces go, who wants them, who benefits. You protect yourself by being boring in the best way. You don't brag. You don't accuse. You don't claim knowledge you don't have. You let your work be your statement. This protects you from envy. It protects your household from attention. Silence, for a craftsman, is sometimes the safest tool. After a long day, you step outside. You hear other labor sounds fading. Wood knocks. Pots clink. Distant voices. A dog bark that stops quickly. The air cools. Your hands feel tender and clean. The mind begins to release the day. You don't think in grand history terms. You think in tomorrow terms. Do we have enough cloth? Is the grid supply stable? Will water be easy in the morning? Small questions. Small anchors. Perfect for sleep. An apprentice watches you. You don't give them a lecture. You guide their hand. You show them pressure not by describing it, but by letting them feel it. They push too hard. You soften their grip. They go too fast. You slow their wrist. You teach them the greatest rule of Jade. If you rush, you lose. If you go steady, you win. They learn quickly because Jade is honest. Jade does not reward impatience. An apprentice does not begin by polishing jade. An apprentice begins by watching. For weeks. Sometimes months. They carry water. They prepare slurry. They clean workstations. They observe. And through observation, they learn the rhythm of the workshop before they ever touch stone. The apprentice watches how you add slurry. How much water? How much grit? How you mix it, not stirring frantically, but folding gently until the consistency is right. They watch how you hold jade. Firmly, but not gripping with tension. Supportive, not crushing. They watch how you move your hand in circles. Small circles, overlapping. Not random, not wandering. They watch how often you rinse. Not on a timer. But when the sound changes. They watch how you inspect. Tilting jade to catch light. running fingertips over edges, pausing to really look. They are not told to watch these things. They simply see them, day after day, until the patterns become familiar. And familiarity is the first step toward competence. When the foreman decides an apprentice is ready, not when the apprentice asks, but when the foreman observes sufficient readiness, the apprentice receives their first assignment. Not a valuable piece. A practice piece. Lower tier jade. Darker color, visible inclusions, maybe a small crack that makes it unsuitable for important work. But still jade. Still hard. Still requiring the same techniques. The apprentice is given coarse grit only. Not medium. Not fine. Just coarse. Because coarse grit removes material quickly. Mistakes are visible immediately. Too much pressure? The surface shows it. Uneven circles? The surface shows it. Inconsistent slurry? The sound reveals it. Coarse grit is honest. It does not hide poor technique. So the apprentice learns on coarse grit. And they make every mistake. They press too hard. They add too much water. They let the slurry dry out. They create uneven patches. They round corners that should be crisp. Every mistake is a lesson. And every lesson is stored in the hands, not the head. The apprentice does not advance on a schedule. They advance when their hands prove capability. The first marker, consistent surface from coarse grit. When the apprentice can use coarse grit to create an even surface, no high spots, no gouges, no wavering, they earn access to medium grit. Medium grit is more forgiving. But it also requires more patience. Because medium grit removes material slower. If the apprentice rushes, medium grit accomplishes nothing. So medium grit teaches patience that coarse grit cannot. The second marker, smooth surface from medium grit. When the apprentice can refine a coarse work surface into a consistently smooth one, no remaining deep scratches, no uneven transitions, they earn access to fine grit. Fine grit is not given lightly. Fine grit is expensive. Fine grit is delicate. Wasted fine grit is wasted resources. So only apprentices who have proven carefulness and efficiency receive it. The third marker, polished finish from fine grit. When the apprentice can take a medium work surface and bring it to a lustrous finish, clean, even, reflective, they are no longer an apprentice. They are a journeyman. Not a master. But no longer a beginner. This progression takes time. Some apprentices reach journeyman status in 2 years. Some take 5. Some never reach it at all. When an apprentice breaks a practice piece, the consequence is mild. The piece was already low value. The foreman may scold briefly. But the apprentice continues working. When an apprentice wastes grit through carelessness, letting slurry dry out, contaminating batches, using too much at once, the consequence is more serious. Grit is rationed. Wasted grit means less grit for everyone. So the apprentice may lose grit access for a period. They return to water carrying and cleaning duties. They regain access only when they demonstrate renewed care. When an apprentice damages a workshop piece, not a practice piece, but actual commissioned work, the consequence is severe. If the damage is minor, the apprentice is reassigned to practice pieces indefinitely. They must rebuild trust from the beginning. If the damage is major, if the piece is ruined, the apprentice may be dismissed. Not with anger. With quiet finality. This work is not for you. You should find another trade. Dismissal is rare. But it happens. Because the workshop cannot afford workers who repeatedly damage valuable materials. The relationship between master and apprentice is not father-son. It is not warm affection. It is responsibility and succession. The master is responsible for teaching technique not through lectures, but through demonstration and correction. Preventing major mistakes, watching the apprentice closely enough to intervene before disaster. Evaluating readiness, deciding when the apprentice advances to the next skill level. The apprentice is responsible for listening not just to words, but to the master's tone and body language. Practicing repeating techniques until they become automatic. Accepting correction without defensiveness, without excuses. The bond is built through this exchange. The master invests time and knowledge. The apprentice applies effort and humility. Over months and years, a mutual respect develops. Not friendship, necessarily, but respect. The apprentice respects the master's skill and experience. The master respects the apprentice's dedication and improvement. And when the apprentice eventually becomes a journeyman and perhaps, years later, a master themselves, they remember their first master. Not with sentimentality. With gratitude for the harsh corrections that prevented bad habits. With gratitude for the patience when learning was slow. With gratitude for the high standards that shaped competence. Much of what an apprentice learns is never spoken aloud. It is absorbed through proximity and repetition. The unspoken rules include: always clean your station before leaving, even if you are exhausted. Never borrow tools without returning them to the exact spot you found them. If you contaminate slurry, discard it immediately. Do not try to hide the mistake. If you do not understand a correction, ask once, but only once, and phrase it carefully. Respect jade by handling it as if it is always valuable, even practice pieces. These rules are not written. They are not announced. They are simply the way things are done. And apprentices who violate them receive correction. Sometimes verbal. Sometimes just a look. Sometimes reassignment to more basic tasks until the lesson is learned. The workshop functions smoothly because everyone follows these unspoken rules. And the rules perpetuate because each generation of apprentices learns them from the previous generation of masters. One of the hardest skills to teach is hand-feel judgment. The ability to feel surface quality with fingertips alone. To detect a tiny scratch that eyes might miss. To sense when one area is slightly less polished than another. To know, without measuring, whether an edge is evenly rounded or subtly lopsided. This cannot be taught through explanation. It can only be developed through practice. The master demonstrates. Feel this edge. Notice how it is smooth here but catches slightly here. The apprentice feels. At first, they feel nothing, both areas seem the same. The master has them close their eyes and feel again. Slowly, over weeks, the apprentice's fingertips become more sensitive. they begin to detect differences. Tiny differences. Differences that seem impossible to feel, but are there. This is when the apprentice realizes. The hands know things the eyes cannot see. And jade polishing is as much about touch as about vision. Maybe more. The apprentice also learns to hear differences. The sound of grit cutting jade is not uniform. It changes based on grit size, coarse equals rasp, fine equals whisper. Slurry wetness, correct equals steady sound, too dry equals squeak, too wet equals silence. Pressure, correct equals rhythmic, too hard equals grinding, too light equals sliding. Experienced workers do not look at their jade constantly. They listen. And they adjust based on what they hear. The apprentice learns to do the same. At first, all sounds seem identical. But gradually, distinctions emerge. That sound means slurry is spent, reload now. That sound means pressure is too heavy, lighten your touch. That sound means you are working correctly, continue. Sound becomes a second form of feedback. And listening becomes as important as looking or feeling. When an apprentice is finally given their first fine grit assignment, it is a quiet milestone. No ceremony. No announcement. The foreman simply hands them a medium worked piece and a bowl of fine grit. Finish this. 2 words. But they carry enormous weight. The apprentice knows this is a test. Not a formal test. But a test nonetheless. If they finish the piece well, they have proven themselves. If they ruin it, they may return to medium grit indefinitely. So they work with extreme care. They take longer than a journeyman would. They check constantly. They rinse frequently. They do not rush, even though anxiety makes them want to. And when they finally set the piece down, polished and gleaming, they wait. The foreman inspects. Silently. Tilts the jade to catch light. Runs fingertips over the surface. Examines edges. Then he nods. Adequate. Do another. Not excellent. Not well done. Just adequate. But the apprentice understands. Adequate from the foreman means good. And do another means continued access to fine grit. Which means they have crossed a threshold. They are no longer an apprentice. They are a journeyman. And the path toward mastery has begun. Imagine the apprentice's first circle. Awkward. Uncertain. Too much pressure. Too little control. Now imagine their 1000th circle. Smooth. Confident. Even pressure. Controlled movement. The transformation did not happen through instruction. It happened through repetition. Hands teaching hands. Mistakes correcting mistakes. Time turning effort into skill. Your hand circles now. The jade smooths. And you remember your first attempts. How clumsy they were. How far you have come. Not through talent. Through patience. Through willingness to fail and try again. This is the apprentice's journey. From fumbling to competence. From competence to mastery. One circle at a time. Demand always wants it faster. Time always refuses. So you live in the middle. You satisfy demand by making systems efficient. Grit staged by coarseness. Slurry strained. Water managed. Wraps prepared. And you satisfy time by staying patient. Circles. Rinses. Checks. Stops. This is the craft's philosophy without preaching. The only way through is steady. Now a return to the bench again. A water bowl. A pinch of grit. A surface waiting. You add slurry. You begin circles. Circle. 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 Rinse. Wipe. Circle. 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 The sound is soft and wet. Like rain on stone. Like sand moving under shallow water. You can feel your breath matching the pace. In. Out. Circle. Circle. Nothing urgent remains. The shine doesn't arrive with a spark. It arrives like dawn. Slowly. A surface that once scattered light now holds it gently. A calm gleam. A quiet finish. You set the piece down. You wrap it. You tie the knot. You wash your hands. And the mind, tired in a good way, lets go. Because the work was steady. And steady work makes steady sleep. Before the sun is strong, the world feels softer. Air is cooler. The ground holds last night's dampness. You wake quietly so you don't pull your household out of sleep too early. A child shifts and settles again. Your wife's breathing stays slow. You dress in a simple cloth wrap, tie it securely, and step outside. The streets are not loud yet. A few figures move with baskets. Someone carries water with careful steps. You walk with your tools wrapped in cloth, close to the body. Not because you're afraid. Because you've learned what happens to tools when they are treated casually. You don't begin with honeyed cakes. You begin with something steady. Grain, warmed and softened. Maybe vegetables. Maybe a small portion of fish when it exists. A sip of liquid. Enough to keep your hands steady. Too much makes you sluggish. Too little makes your arms shake. Your wife measures food with the same practical intelligence you measure slurry. Not too much. Not too little. Just right to keep the day stable. When you arrive, you do not start polishing immediately. You clean. You wipe the slab. You rinse the bowl. You shake out cloth. You check the grit container for clumps. You check the water jar for sediment. This is the quiet habit that keeps your output high without rushing. Prevent problems before they form. Because a scratch can erase an hour. And prevention costs only minutes. The first circles of the morning feel different. Your wrists are fresh. Your fingertips are sensitive. The slurry behaves cleanly. You work slowly at first to set a calm rhythm. Circle. 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 Then a rinse. Then again. You think of it like breathing. Work is exhale. Rinse is inhale. Neither can be skipped. As the morning builds, the workshop fills with gentle noises. String tools rasping with wet grit. Drill bows turning in slow repetition. Water being poured. Cloth being folded. Low voices giving short instructions. Nothing needs to be loud. A loud workshop is usually a disorganized one. A quiet workshop is usually controlled. And control is what keeps valuable materials safe. An apprentice moves too fast. Their circles become wide and sloppy. They press harder to make it go faster. You hear the sound change. A dry rasp. A squeak. You stop them gently. Not with anger. With a hand placed over their wrist to soften pressure. You add more water. You add fresh grit. You show them the most important lesson again. You cannot force Jade. Jade punishes force. The apprentice looks embarrassed. You don't let it become a wound. You simply say, slower is safer. Then you return to your own peace. The sun rises higher. Light becomes harsher and more revealing. This is the best time to inspect. You tilt the jade and watch how it reflects. At first, scratches scatter light like tiny rivers. Later, they become faint. Later still, they almost disappear. You don't chase mirror shine. You chase consistent calmness across the surface. Consistency is what makes an object feel finished. Midday arrives, and with it the heat. Water evaporates faster. Slurry dries quicker. Dust rises more easily. Your hands sweat. Grip becomes uncertain if you're careless. This is where accidents happen, not dramatic ones, but small errors. A slip. A scratch. A rounded edge. So you adjust. You rinse more often. You shorten polishing passes. You rest your wrists briefly to keep control. You drink small amounts. And you accept that midday is slower. Slower is cheaper than broken. Some weeks, grit is plentiful. Other weeks, it is rationed. You notice because the container is measured. You notice because the foreman watches scoops. You notice because the keeper locks storage sooner. This is how large systems show stress. Not with announcements. With tightened material control. So you learn efficiency as craft. Reuse water carefully. Strain slurry to recover useful grit. Keep stations clean so grit isn't wasted in contamination. This is a hidden skill that makes you valuable. You don't only polish. You preserve resources. A finished piece is delivered to the keeper. The keeper inspects. They tilt it. They hold it to light. They find a faint scratch. They don't accuse you loudly. But they don't accept it. So you take it back without argument. You step backward in grit stages. Not all the way to the beginning, just enough to remove the scratch properly. This is not humiliation. This is precision. It's also the difference between your channel and competitors. You show the real world of quality control, handled calmly. Work that is redone is not failure. It's the cost of excellence. When you return later, your wife is still working. Not at stone, but at life. She's repairing cloth. Cleaning. Fetching water. Keeping children fed. Managing small illnesses. And she does it with the same practical calm you bring to polishing. Your craft is visible. Her craft is invisible. But without her craft, your craft collapses. So the episode includes her not as decoration, but as a structural pillar. Children learn by touching and watching. They see your tools wrapped. They learn that wrapped tools mean don't touch. They see how you wash your hands. They learn that hands are precious. They see how you sit when your wrists ache. They learn that work has cost. Sometimes you give them a plain stone and wet sand. You let them rub. They laugh at first, then grow bored. And that boredom teaches the real lesson. Skill is repetition even when it's not exciting. This is how future workers are made. Not through speeches. Through daily exposure. Some days, fever moves through households. Some days, rain turns paths into mud and slows deliveries. Some days, dust storms raise grit everywhere and contaminate everything. These calamities are not cinematic. They are practical disruptions. And practical disruptions are the hardest kind because they don't feel like events. They feel like friction in every task. So you adapt. You cover bowls. You dry cloth. You shorten work. You protect the peace. The system continues because the workers adapt quietly. At day's end, you sharpen. You wipe. You wrap. You tie knots the same way every day. The repeated knot is a safety signal. It tells you if a bundle was opened. It tells you if someone borrowed tools without asking. It tells you your station is closed. This is the crafts version of closure. You don't end with applause. You end with order. Imagine the workshop after work. Empty benches. Quiet air. A bowl of water still sitting, surface smooth as glass. A small jar of grit beside it. Your hands enter this quiet scene gently. You add a pinch of grit. The water clouds softly, like pale mist. Nothing urgent happens. Everything slows. Now the sound begins again. Not loud. Not sharp. A soft wet whisper as grit moves under gentle pressure. Circle. Circle. The whisper is steady enough to carry your thoughts away. You rinse slowly. Water runs like a thin stream. You wipe. You begin again. Circle. Circle. Not for output now. Only for calm. You don't force shine. You don't chase it. You create the conditions: water, grit, time, and the surface becomes smooth on its own schedule. In your mind, the jade darkens slightly with moisture. Then clears. Then holds light gently. Not a mirror. A calm glow. The kind of glow that feels quiet rather than loud. And your breathing matches it. In. Out. Let the last image be small. A hand. A whetstone. A bowl of water. A pinch of grit. A slow circle. 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 Then a rinse. Then stillness. No more inspection. No more deadlines. Only the memory of patient work. Patient enough to turn hardness into shine. Gentle enough to turn wakefulness into sleep. You can rest now. Thanks for listening. Good night.